climbs off all by itself. It does it itself. Okay?
Yeah, you're right there with me though.
Every time I open the hangar door to go flying, I realize that I'm one of the lucky guys doing something that I dreamt of as a kid.
This is the Fieseler Storch, an ironical reminder to United Nations representatives charged with the disarmament of Germany. The fabric-covered Storch was developed during peacetime, but was later modified, armed with a .30 caliber machine gun, and became the most widely used observation and liaison plane in the German Air Force. The inner wing sections operate as flaps, the outer sections as ailerons. A 240 horsepower air-cooled engine gives the plane a maximum speed of 110 miles per hour and a service ceiling of 17,000 feet. The plane is larger, more complex, more heavily powered than comparable Allied types, but flight tests reveal that lower speeds and higher fuel consumption make the Storch operationally inferior to the American L-5. Examination before flight testing showed construction to be excellent throughout. The exceptionally rugged fixed landing gear permits rough takeoffs and heavy landings.
In November 1910, Eugene Ely took off from a modified Navy cruiser on the Virginia coast, flying a Glenn Curtiss airplane. 2 months later, Ely landed on a different ship in San Francisco Bay. Naval aviation was born. Training soon moved from Virginia to Pensacola, Florida, which is the cradle of naval aviation. Every naval and marine aviator to this day traces his or her start in flying to Pensacola. Every Navy aircraft ever flown is housed in the Naval Air Museum at NAS Pensacola. If you love airplanes, especially Navy airplanes, you will love visiting this incredible museum and its National Flight Academy for 7th to 12th graders on Fetterman Way at the museum. The Navy's first ace was Naval Aviator number 85, David Ingalls, in 1918. Flying a British Sopwith Camel for the RAF, he shot down 5 German airplanes in 6 weeks. Plane design and production proceeded unstopped for the next 20 years, and by World War II, naval aviation had become a power to defend our way of life, particularly in the Pacific Theater, after the surprise Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. Just 4 months later, in April 1942, Jimmy Doolittle led 16 Army Air Corps B-25 bombers from the Navy carrier Hornet in a daring raid. They accurately and successfully bombed targets in Japan that sent a strong message to the Japanese leadership. The message: you made a huge mistake bombing America. Navy planes dominated in the Pacific War. Fighters, the Grumman Cat series, the Wildcat, the Bearcat, the Tiger Cat, and the Hellcat. Hellcat pilots shot down over 5,000 Japanese airplanes in the Pacific. The late Alex Vashew, the Navy's 4th-ranking ace, said that he loved his Hellcat so much that if it could cook, he'd marry it. And there were dive bombers, the Douglas SBD Dauntless, that was a key in destroying Japanese aircraft carriers at the Battle of Midway. And the Helldiver that replaced the Dauntless. There were PBYs and the Kingfisher spotter and rescue planes, and of course, the 400-mile-per-hour Corsair. The Corsair was one of the most successful fighter planes of World War II and very effective later in the Korean War. Most of its fighting in World War II was in the Pacific Theater against the Japanese. The Navy flew the Corsair from aircraft carriers, the Marines from island airfields. It was an air-to-air fighter. It was a ground attack aircraft and escorted on bomber missions, protecting them from Japanese fighters. It was the first American plane to outperform the Japanese Zero. It could outclimb, outrun, and with its firepower, outgun any prop-driven enemy aircraft. And with its solid build, it could take severe punishment, and it was hard to bring down. Allied troops called it the Angel of Okinawa and the Sweetheart of the Marianas after the Mariana Islands campaign. The Japanese called it Whistling Death because of a distinctive sound the Corsair made at high speeds. Corsairs were especially successful at intercepting and shooting down thousands of Japanese kamikaze planes before they could reach Allied ships. Corsairs dropped 70% of all bombs dropped by fighters in World War II, flying more than 64,000 sorties, and had over 2,100 air victories, losing only 189 aircraft in combat. The plane could be very difficult to fly, and sadly, nearly 700 Corsairs were lost in non-combat accidents. A popular TV series, Black Sheep Squadron, popularized the Corsair and the Marine Squadron Commander, Pappy Boyington. Four aviators received the Medal of Honor for their Corsair accomplishments. Marine Major Gregory Pappy Boyington, Marine First Lieutenant Robert Henson, Navy Lieutenant Junior Grade Tom Hudner, and Marine Lieutenant Ken Walsh. Afternoon, everybody. I'm David Hartman. It's nice to be with you today, and thank you. Thank you. And please welcome Jim Tobul, who owns this airplane.
Thank you.
Jim, when we just wound up the video talking about 4 Medal of Honor recipients from World War II, with your experience in your entire lifetime with this airplane, when you see and think about them, what goes through your mind and through your heart when you see them and think about what they did?
You know, just the valor alone. I mean, these are young guys thrown into combat, flying a fighter, and you're out, it's kill or be killed. And you're out there doing the best you possibly can, and you have all these elements that are against you, and then you have a machine like this that makes you into a positive impact. Because it's the tool. It is truly a tool.
So this airplane, or different designs of the airplane, had a multi-year life. Going back to that period at the tail end of World War II, what was that airplane capable of doing, and then how did it progress out of that before we got to Korea?
Well, this aircraft obviously served in the Pacific Theater. And you go backwards, and you had the Wildcat, which, you know, was great in its time, but it was a little lesser of an aircraft than our adversaries. So then the Hellcat came out, and so on and so forth. Each one, the Japanese had a little bit better aircraft. So the Corsair was designed based upon all this knowledge that we learned, that we had to design something to attack the Zero. So this aircraft used the largest engine and propeller combination at the time, and Chance Vaught built the airframe around the power plant and propeller.
So then moving on to Korea, so what happened in the design of the airplane when you got to Korea?
Well, they
it's
learned.
Now like 5-6 years later.
Yes, they learned a lot from the Dash 1 variations. Goodyear, they couldn't produce them enough, so they subcontracted to Goodyear. Goodyear and Chance Vaught were supplying aircraft concurrently. So they learned a lot of enhancements, such as adding the 4th blade. Instead of having a 3-blade, they put floors inside the aircraft. The wings were now armament, where they could put 8 5-inch HVR rockets. And the Dash 4 was a learning curve from all the other predecessors as to a more enhanced, higher altitude aircraft.
We just heard those names, Pappy Boyington. Did you ever meet Pappy Boyington?
You know, that's so ironic. I'm old. And so back in the early 80s, I would come out here and buy parts at Ban Air. They had their little shop, and having a T6, you need seal kits or whatever. So I would buy my parts, and there's Pappy Boynton with his wife selling the book. And I'd go over and talk with him, speak with him, not knowing one day I would actually be flying a Corsair.
What about Tom Hudner?
Tom Hudner, I was very blessed to have the opportunity. We presented to a young recipient a scholarship, and Tom asked that I join him in this presentation over at the Eagle Hangar. And what an amazing individual Tom Hudner was.
So, and explain what happened to him in Korea, just so we get an idea.
Well, they were flying in Korea in Corsairs, and his wingman, one of the pilots, Jesse Brown, I believe his name was, he was the first black fighter pilot that I believe that we had in that Corsair era. And he had engine trouble, and he landed the aircraft behind enemy lines.
It's up in North Korea.
Yes, in North Korea during the Korea War. And then Tom would circle and willing to sacrifice his aircraft to help his wingman he didn't know if he was alive or, what the situation was. And so he ended up doing the best he could under the circumstances with his airplane.
And your lifetime is tied up with this airplane. When did you start flying?
Wow. I started flying when I was 9 years old. Dad had a Stinson 108. 9 years old, and I would sit there, and he taught me how to fly. And that has a big rudder. That was a little bit of a challenge. But I didn't have a phone book. I actually was able to sit on a pillow. But and so from that point forward, my father was a pilot.
Tell me about your dad.
Well, my dad served in the Marine Corps, and I was born at Cherry Point. And he was in VMF 231, which is now VMA 231. And I was slated to fly Harriers in his former squadron. And the Hawaiian life came, and ailing family business, Marine Corps, and so I knew where I had to go. And so I did not go down that path, but aviation has always been in my blood, and so my dad and I worked together as well with the business. And so we started to work on warbirds. So our first one was an SNJ. We bought it, we restored it, we flew it. And then we had...
Did you actually physically do the restorations?
Physically, yes. My dad and I both did all the work. We restored them, flew them, repaired them, and paid the bills, swept the floor, and kept them clean.
And where did this airplane come from? Where'd you get this airplane?
Well, we looked at 5 different projects, and so we selected this particular model after looking at, I think, about 4 or 5. We bought it in 1981 in 3 truckloads of parts. And it took us 10 years to build it. Got it flying in 1991, and in 1992 was the first air show, and that was in Titusville, Florida in 1992.
And how did that go?
Oh, elated. My father was just elated. I mean, you spend 10 years of your life building something that you'd work weeks and weeks and weeks, and you wonder, what progress did we make? Because you just keep working, and then finally it all comes together.
How much of that is passion and how much of it is obsession?
In our case, 98% was passion. 2% was obsession.
So he started flying it.
Yes.
Did you start flying it then too?
I did a few years later. Dad wanted to work out all the bings and the bangs and, get the airplane kind of dialed in, so to speak. So a couple years later, then I jumped into it. I think it was about 93. 94, right. And then I started to fly the aircraft.
So what happened with him flying the airplane?
You mean initially?
Yeah, no, later.
Oh, in 2002, my father, we were at an air show, the last air show of the season, which is in Columbia, South Carolina, and he developed engine trouble in the aircraft and was trying to get back to the... Well, let me back it up. The reason why we were there is my dad always went over to the VA, and he noticed that the VA patients couldn't make it to the airport for the air show. So he would call them up and say, hey, wheel all the guys out in the front yard. I'm going to bring the Corsair over and give them their own little air show. So he started going, and I would go, and other pilots are going, hey, where are you going? My dad said, well, we're going over the VA and give them a little air show themselves. They said, well, we want to go with you. So it turned out that we had more. Each year was more and more aircraft. Well, we had a B-25, we had T-6s, Corsairs, Mustangs, all heading over to the VA. And so we were rendezvousing. We were all getting together, and that's when my dad had engine trouble. So he was low and slow. And in a Corsair, altitude, airspeed is your friend. So he had very limited places to land going low and slow. Saw a neighborhood, and he was just coming in to land in the neighborhood, very dicey with houses and such. And so I was on his wing. I was flying an SNJ. He peeled over, and he just landed ever so gently in the tops of the trees. Little did we know the trees were that big around. So I had lost my father and the aircraft in 2002.
You know, at the risk of going down this road, when you're so deeply entwined with your dad in every way, and you're flying on his wing and see what happened with you after that accident when you lost your dad?
That's interesting.
What went on?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because I was in the SNJ, and I would fly off my dad's wing. And I had my oldest son in my back seat, and my other son was in the B-25. And my mother was on the ground at the time. So we basically had the entire family there. And when I saw the accident, I circled, waiting for him to get out. And fire ensued. And now I could see what the situation was. I didn't see him come out. I didn't know what it was. But now I have my son in the back seat. So I need to land. Got my game face on, picked up everything I had to pick up, get back to the airport. Of course, there's a 90-degree crosswind. And landed the airplane, did what I needed to do, and then it was tough. It was very difficult.
So how do you start picking up pieces after something like that happens?
Well,
not only for the airplane, but for you.
Well, my dad, we worked together, we played together, worked hard, played hard, and he was my best friend. It was one of those. So it was very difficult. And about 6 years later, I decided I want to rebuild the airplane.
6 years?
6 years it took me to kind of just digest the whole situation. And, not to digress too much, but after the accident, I got in the SNJ and went to Tyndall Air Force Base in March of the following year. So it was my first air show after my dad had the accident. And I was sitting there eating breakfast, and there was a Delta pilot and, various pilots. And we all go to the airfield, and he was racing the jet truck. And somehow there was a miscommunication. The jet truck took off, and he thought it was a taunting pass. He saw he messed up, pulled it hard, stalled it, and impacted the ground. So I just sat there, and I just walked up and down the flight line, because this is the second time in a very short period of time, and really questioned myself and what I just saw. But again, I pulled within, persevered, rationalized what happened, and keep moving forward. So it took 6 years to get over that, and had the opportunity to buy a lot of parts and facilitate the restoration. So I started to work on it, and again, my dad and I did the work.
So how beat up was the
wreck? It was pretty beat up, but I could salvage it, and so I did that. And it was going to take. I had a friend of mine, Bill Clares at Westpac, and he was good friends of my dad. And he said, "Jim, I hear you're going to restore the airplane." I said, "Yep." He says, "It's going to take you about 8 years, 10 years." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You'll be 60 what?" And I said, that's just not fair. That's not nice.
Yeah, right.
He said, "Tell you what, bring it to me. I know what this airplane means to you. I'll have you flying in 2 years." Wow. And I thought about that, and I shipped everything out to Westpac. 2 years, he had this bird back in the air. So 2011 is when this aircraft came back out, and I went to the same Tyco Air Show with the first time this airplane came out, which is the same time in 1992 on its initial restoration. So the aircraft represents my dad and myself, and it's right there.
So it's not just yeah.
And you know what? A little tidbit here. I'm going to digress on
No,
you.
digress.
And so when I'm restoring it, it's coming down to the paint job. Well, what is respectful? Should my dad be above me? Should he be below me? Where on the name in the cockpit should I put him? And I thought, I didn't know what to do. I always want to be respectful. One night I woke up and I thought, wait a minute, he's with me. So I put a slash. So if you look at the airplane, you'll see my name / my dad's name. So he's always with me when I fly this airplane.
Oh, boy.
Tidbit, just a little tidbit.
Yeah, a little tidbit. So when you fly this airplane in various shows and sorts, what do you do? What goes on?
Well, I perform an aerobatic demonstration. I want to show what the aircraft is capable of. So I'll do a full aerobatics display. A lot of times you won't see a full Cuban because it's difficult. You have to have a lot of energy to do one side of the Cuban and come into the second half of the Cuban. So that's my first entry is the full Cuban, and then I go into a roll series with the aircraft and really let people see and hear and feel what 2,000 plus horsepower sounds and looks like up there.
So what else do you do air show wise besides your solo?
Then I'm part of an act, if you will, called Class of 45. And a friend of mine has a Mustang, and it's a 1945 build. This is a 1945 manufacturer. So we said, hey, we have 2 headline aircraft. Let's do something together. And he performs an incredible aerobatic demonstration in a P-51. I do a full demonstration in the Corsair. And then when we're finished, we come together and we fly formation and aerobatics with the Corsair and the Mustang. And that's called Class 45.
And you flew this last night?
I did. We were invited to fly the Twilight, just preemptive to the night flight. So there's supposed to be a little light up there. And yes, we performed 2 initial maneuvers, not our full act, because we're limited in time, and then the full Class of 45.
And how did it go, Jim?
Went really
Last
good
night.
to about halfway point. And we're turning in formation, we're coming at the crowd, and we're just about to roll up in the belly. And I fly very close formation to the Mustang, so my focal is 100% on the aircraft. And all of a sudden, I saw something pass me very quickly off the right wing, and I felt a thump. And I looked and I went, birds. We went through birds. And I felt a thump. Everything felt normal. I looked at the wings. I couldn't see anything. I called it out. At this point, I have a decision. Either knock it off, stop everything, land the airplane, or continue. So I let my lead know that I had a bird strike, but everything seems to be normal. Let's continue.
So the plane took it.
The plane took it and kept on flying, and then we continued. We did some more aerobatics, and I landed the aircraft, and there was nothing unusual, no vibration, no nothing, until I shut the engine off, got out and looked to see what happened.
And what'd you see?
I saw that hole in the wing, right where that black tape is. I don't know if you can see
Wait,
that.
I'll point it out. You covered this up pretty well.
Well, we had to go into surgery last night, lift the wing and remove some things and items that were stuck right in. This is the gun camera. So there's a big void where the wing folds and the gun camera goes in there. I just happened to not have the camera inside there. So the large bird went through the glass, through the lens of the camera, into the void and just...
Shattered everything.
Yeah, shattered. So he did that. Also, another one I think hit right here and dented the leading edge as well.
So what are you going to do now with this?
Well, I will. Right now, it's basically unairworthy, and so I will take it over to the Weeks hangar, and I'll create a patch to go over top of this with aluminum, metal aluminum, and I'll rivet it in place. And this will be a temporary patch to get me through to the winter time, where we'll do the proper fix.
Right. And what? But glad that went.
Yes,
okay.
bird
Jeez.
strikes can be.
Yeah. So, but you're
challenging.
flying again on Saturday?
I am. Yes, we're
And
flying
what are you
during the
flying
day.
then? Yeah. What are you flying on Saturday?
Well, on Saturday I'll be flying Class 45, And then on Sunday, I will be flying. I'm a Navy Legacy pilot, and I'll be
What
flying.
What does that mean?
It means the Air Force has the Heritage where they fly with the P-51s. Well, the Navy has a Navy Legacy side where we'll fly with the Super Hornets or the Rhinos, various naval aircraft. And I'll be flying what they call the Growler. The Growler is an F-18G model, which is more electronic warfare. Right. And I'll be flying with him on Sunday, representing the Navy.
Go back and...
I'm the old guy. They're the new guy.
Yeah. Go back and talk about some of these pilots and the legacy of the men who flew this airplane beginning in World War II through Korea. Did they fly in Vietnam at all?
I don't think that they did. I think by Vietnam you had the Sky Raiders and some of the other heavier lifters, which then made this more obsolete. And the Sky Raider was more purpose-oriented, which we call them a flying dump truck, because they could just put so much ordnance underneath, equaling the weight of the aircraft, where the Corsair was more limited in the amount of ammunition and stores and items to haul.
But when you talk with, like today, with people, what do you say about the legacy of the guys who flew these airplanes? And many of them, of course, as we have heard, gave up their lives flying this airplane. You know,
it's amazing. The aircraft was World War II based, and they came out with challenges. The initial Corsair could not make a good carrier landing. It would bounce. So they strickened all the Corsairs from carrier operations. So they took the Corsairs and put them in the Pacific Islands. And then you had Pappy Boynton flying the aircraft from the land strips until Chance Vought could develop a way so the struts wouldn't bounce the aircraft on the carrier. So in that time frame, they developed it, they proved it, and then the Corsairs were allowed to come back to the carriers.
What's the gull wing? How did that come about? Why was it necessary?
Well, that's interesting because they were started with the largest engine and propeller combination at the time. So Chance Vought had to build the airframe around that power plant. And so when they did that, they put a straight wing across. If you can visualize the straight wing, the gear would be so long, there's no way it could actually operate effectively on a carrier. It's just too long. It would break and snap and not have the rigidity to handle it. So the designers, the engineers said, well, we'll just gull the wing, lessen the length of the gear. Therefore, we have a carrier operation that won't have any adverse effect. Therefore, hence the gull wing design.
So how did that affect the way the airplane flew?
You know, that's another interesting question. They say, well, does it give you any better aerodynamics? Does the plane doesn't even know it. There really isn't any added benefit in the flying aspect of the airplane. It just looks really cool.
So your family went through all of this with you. Describe what this was like for them.
In terms of?
Your dad and all of that.
Well, they knew this was our passion. And we loved aviation. We loved warbirds. We flew in the business. So I did corporate flying. My dad did corporate flying. And this was a hobby. And we enjoyed our hobby. And that's where the passion comes through. And, you work hard. It allows you to play hard.
So other airplanes, what else do you fly? Or what else do you own, if any?
Well, I have a couple of SNJs, which I really love. My wife calls this the selfish airplane because she can't go. One seat's a fighter. But we can go in the SNJ, so we can travel together. She loves flying in the T6, and we fly to different air shows. So I have that. I have a Bird Dog, which is a nice high-wing aircraft. Have a Husky that we do. I live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So we do backcountry.
Gosh. Should we all go, poor guy, lives in Jackson Hole, ugly Jackson Hole.
Anyway, out west, the Husky has Tundra tires. We do backcountry flying. So that, again, the aviation aspect, very, very diversified in aircraft. Plus, I have an inflatoplane. Do you know what a Goodyear inflatoplane is?
I have no idea.
It's a rubber airplane that Goodyear Aircraft Corporation.
This sounds like a wonderful idea, doesn't it?
Back then, it was before the helicopter, and they were going to, for a downed aircraft behind enemy lines, They would just parachute this aircraft in on a skid. It would land. The pilot would open it up, gave you a little machete to cut about a couple hundred feet. It blew up by itself with a CO2 bottle. Engine came up, you started the engine, and you could fly 500 nautical miles in about 70, 80 miles an hour. And the downed pilot could come back to the good side.
And next year at Warbirds, we're going to have, what's it called?
So I have one.
Really?
I still have one of those left. Yeah.
I'll be darned. How many children do you have?
2 boys.
And how interested are they in aviation? Or did they have a choice?
They were raised around aviation, well, obviously with my father and myself. So they're just as involved.
So what about your future with all of this? I mean, your whole life has been airplanes. Is there anything else going on besides your business?
Is there anything else?
Well, that's a good question.
No. I like to
knowledge.
sail. I sail boats. So I go to the Caribbean and do some sailing. And I'm very diversified. I like doing, so it's hard to hold me down.
So what more about this airplane?
Snowmobiling. We got snowmobiling, skiing. I mean, I could go on. I'm a scuba diver. Insurance companies don't like me. I have to check all the boxes for life insurance.
Have you thought about any other fighter aircraft to fly them in air shows besides the Corsair?
Actually, I'm type rated in the B-25, and I had the opportunity to fly the lead B-25 Tuesday night for Dick Cole's tribute. I knew Dick Cole, and I actually used to fly off his wing with the Corsair, and he'd be flying the B-25. But I'm a PIC rated pilot, so I flew, and it was an honor for me to be a part of that Tuesday evening.
So I'll digress for just a second. Dick Cole, I'm sure all of you know who Dick Cole was, but I'll say anyway that Dick was flying in the right seat of B-25 when Jimmy Doolittle took off to fly Doolittle Raiders back in April of 1942 that attacked Japan. Dick had a long career, and he was one of our last guests last year here at Warbirds. He and Mike Trahan and did the last program, and he did programs with us almost every year. And rest his soul, we lost Dick just a few months ago. So let's take a couple of seconds to remember Dick Cole. What a magnificent patriot he was.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Boy, Dick Cole. What?
He's so fiery, too. Just an amazing individual. Every time I would see him, it just life, full of life. And I said, "You're 90 what?"
Yeah, and he was 101.
Yes, 101.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that's it. Thank you so much, Jim. Appreciate it. Everything that you have shared with us today, especially about your family and your life's journey with your family. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
And please welcome Sam Bass, who's got 50 years of great flying.
Luck.
Yeah, luck, right. But accident-free flying. And Sam's got over 35,000 hours himself in the cockpit, and he's our airplane guy. Sam?
Yeah, we're going to spend a little bit of time here with Jim, if he'll let us. And
absolutely.
Come up and stand by the airplane and let you point out some little things.
I'll get out
Just give us just a general description of the Corsair. We've already covered the inverted gull wing. How much horsepower has this airplane got?
Well, mine's a little different. I've actually boosted mine a little bit higher. I'm running 2,600 horsepower, but typically it should be 2,200.
2,200 was normal.
2,200 was normal.
Okay.
I'm abnormal.
Was that was all variants of it?
It was all variants, military variants.
Right,
yes.
I understand. How about the armament on the airplane?
Armament. There was
probably
6
different ones.
Yeah, there were different variations. This particular aircraft, you can see the gun ports had 6 50 caliber machine guns and 2,400 rounds of ammunition. The other variation was 20 millimeters on each wing. And I'm not sure the total capacity, but it was 20 millimeter. They were real big.
Well, how about underwing ordnance? Did it carry underwing ordnance?
The Dash 4, which is this variation, my other set of wings, this is my spare set, has stations, and it has 8 5-inch HVARs, which was a normal ordnance for this aircraft. So you had 4 and 4 under each wing. Then you had the pylons in the center. The standard configuration was all 50 caliber shells, 8 5-inch HVAR, which is high velocity aircraft rockets. And then under the belly, the right was always a drop tank to carry you to destination, to the target. And then in the other side would be either a 500-pounder or a 1,000-pound tiny TIM. And that would be a standard configuration for a Corsair for close air support.
How effective was it in close air support?
Extremely. In fact, all the ground guys, they were just, they call in a strike, and the Corsairs would come in, and with all the 5-inch rockets and the bombs and the 50 caliber from each aircraft that was coming in, extremely effective, especially when the Koreans would be into a hillside and they had a cave. The Corsairs would come right down and shoot all those rockets straight into the cave and take out the bad guys so we can continue moving forward.
Well, now, during the Second World War, actually, when it was it designed also to be a fighter and close air support?
It was. It had a double role, if you will, because initially when it came out in its World War II, I should say Pacific Theater, it was a fighter, strictly a fighter. And as it progressed, it became more of a close air support attack type mode.
What was the kill ratio between the Corsair and the Zeros?
God.
Make up something nobody knows.
It was quite a bit. It actually was very effective.
Yeah,
very
I know it's effective.
Yes.
All right. Now, your particular paint job, of course, you've got Jim Tobul on the back, and you've got your, but what is the 416, and what does that designate?
Well, when we bought the aircraft, you don't know the history. And so Dad went up to Naval Archives and did the history search on the bureau number, 97143. And when he started to research it, he found that it was on the USS Boxer, on the carriers, USS Boxer, the USS Valley Forge, and the USS Riscany. So it was on 3 different aircraft carriers. And when it goes on a carrier, it's in a different squadron. And so some of them were painted differently. Some had H's on the tail, some had A's, some had the yellow accents on it, some had blue, some had green. And so my dad started to research the squadrons and found pilots that actually flew our airplane in combat. We got copies of their logbooks showing all the strafes and all the sorties they were going on with this exact airplane. So here we have the pilots that flew it in combat, and we have a true veteran. Not knowing it.
That's neat.
It is really neat. And unfortunately, all the pilots have passed. Age has caught up. But there is still one crew chief that actually, he was the crew chief on this exact airplane on the USS Valley Forge. And the skipper was Cook Cleland.
Wow.
You remember that name,
Oh, yeah,
don't you?
sure.
Cook Cleland.
Yeah. Well, now, you've flown a lot of different warbirds. How would you compare flying this to the different warbirds you've flown?
Wow, that's interesting. My dad was my IP, instructor pilot. And so he wrote my syllabus to get into this airplane, to transition. And, being a Marine, it wasn't going to be easy. And so I had to follow exactly what he wrote. I did everything he said. And it became the day I had to fly it. And I got in there, and I'm just looking at this big, huge 14-foot propeller and this horsepower. And I was ready. I go, Dad, I don't know about this. He goes, son, it's easier to fly in the SNJ. And I'd look down at him and say, it's easy to say that down there. And I had 1,500 hours in the T6. We've been friends a long time.
Yeah.
I've been flying that.
Yeah.
So first time, get out there, and I'm on the runway, and we operate out of 3,600 feet, very small strip. And I told Dad, I'm not coming back here. I'm going to go to Barnwell. It's got 5,000-foot strip. I said, I'll learn to land it, do whatever I got to do, and then I'll come back. So I'll be back when I feel I'm ready. So off I go, and I had never brought it up to 2,800 RPM before, because the practice is a tail up and then back down. So the first time I took it all the way up, I got up to 2,800 RPM, and I'm still pushing throttle, and it's still coming up, and just everything is going crazy with this engine. And before I know it, I looked outside, I'm already in the air. And so I'm in there trying to put the gear up, put the canopy crank, and pull power back, pull this back, do this, trim every time you do something. And it was a hellacious 25 seconds. And by the time I got it, I'm climbing, and all my work stopped. It was like, wow. Got through that. So then I brought it around and went to Barnwell, set up for the landing, and I come in, and I'm ready for anything. I don't know what's going to happen. This is my first landing, and after that takeoff, I wasn't sure what to expect. So I came down, and the touchdown on the mains, squatted on the tail, and that was it. I said, that's a fluke. Turn around, went through another 20-second hellacious thing, and take off, come back around. Same thing. Wheels landed. Everything was just as easy as my dad said. But, of course, I couldn't believe him.
Well, are you the ones that talk about the 51 and the Corsair being a good trainer for a T6?
Yeah, I agree. I do agree with that now.
So if you can fly the T6, you can fly
But
that.
it turns out to be some of the finest flying that I've experienced in aircraft. This aircraft has balance tabs, which makes it like power steering, as opposed to a P-51 that does not. And the faster you fly, it becomes more like a dump truck. It takes two hands. This becomes two fingers. So it's quite different.
Well, one last question before we have some questions and answers here. When you fly, what, 18 times a year as far as air shows, and then some other times past that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to you as a person to fly this legacy to these different air shows? Not just for the pleasure, I'm sure. What does it mean to you to let people see this?
Wow. Every time my feet go on those rudder pedals, I think about all the pilots that flew it before me. Now, we bought this in parts, and so it only saw military air service. So we're the first civilian pilots to put our feet on the rudder pedals. So I just think about all the pilots preempting me and how humble it is, and I'm simply a caretaker. And so it allows me to show folks how it sounds, how it looks, just everything about the aircraft. To me, that's something I'm sharing from history, and I'm propelling that forward. So that humbles me.
Well, and earlier, I'm sure it's the same with this airplane as it is with all the other warbirds. When we had World War II veterans that come up to see these airplanes, they'd say, this is the first time I've seen it since I flew it 30 years ago.
I had so many Korean guys come up, Americans, they'd fought in Korea was what I meant. And they would say, that airplane saved my life. I'm a ground pounder, and I was down in the trenches, and it didn't look like we were going to see tomorrow. And he says, all we did hear is this whistling sound, and it was just sheer fire and brimstone. And he says, that's what saved my life, this airplane right there. And I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard that. So very heartwarming from the ground pounder's perspective of what kind of work that aircraft did for them.
Thank you. Do you mind if people ask you a few questions? Kyle, anybody got a question? Wait till you get the mic, please.
Curious as to what attribute of this airplane made it give it a second life in Korea as opposed to, say, the P-51, which I don't think served in Korea.
Wow, that's a good question. I think because of the armament that it had, it was a very stable platform. The engine was a radial engine. There was a lot of cargo aircraft that used a very similar engine, so you have common parts. A P-51 has a very unique engine. It's a Merlin. They continued to build this aircraft through the 50s. I think it was 56, 57 when they built the Dash 7 Corsair. So the production went very long as opposed to the P-51. So you had a lot more aircraft and a lot more exposure in the supply system for that aircraft to be continued to be used. This aircraft was actually sold to surplus, and then the surplus ended up selling it to Honduras, and this aircraft served in the Honduran Air Force and fought against El Salvador. So it made it through the soccer war in the 60s as well. So not only did it have U.S. naval history, it fought in the soccer war, ended up as a parts plane, and that's what we bought it in 1981 in 3 truckloads of parts.
One over here.
They showed a video of the plane running with the pilot in it, and the wings are coming down.
surely there's some kind of pre-flight prior to flying that aircraft. Make sure the wings are locked somehow.
Yes, it has redundant systems within there. So when you spread the wings, means it's going to spread it all the way down. It has to hit a...
Sound of freedom.
That's right. Oh, those are the guys I'll be flying with. The wings come down, and there are cylinders that push a locking mechanism that locks the wing in place. Now, there's another pin that goes in the back of the cylinder to ensure that pin never backs out in flight. So it's all by wire, and so I lock the cylinders that we know. So there's doors that come open. That's telling you that the lock pin is not engaged. When the doors shut, that means the pins are all the way through, because the physical pin has to push that door shut, so you know the pins are engaged. And then there's two more red tags that stick up, and that's what I have to lock. Those are the pins going in the back of the cylinders to ensure they can never back up, even loss of hydraulics. So that's a good question, and it's ensured that the wings will not come up when you're up there.
Yes, sir.
I just have a comment to make. My older brother was in the Korean War in the Marine Corps. He was a crew chief on 6 AD Sky Raiders and 6 Corsairs, and used to go up and test them after they're repaired. But he was in the war doing that job. Just thought I'd add that.
That is great, because these were right aside the AD Sky Raiders. They were doing different missions, different places, and also the Panther jet was there as well.
He told me many stories.
Anyone else?
Yep.
Thanks.
When I say Zelienople, Pennsylvania.
You hit it.
I was there the day they put the fuel tank in, which by itself was an interesting. Loved your father. Spent a little bit of time. Good to see it flying.
Thank you so much. Yes, that really took me back. We actually put it together up
We
there.
have one more lady here.
Hello. Why does the plane have fabric on it?
Good question. If you notice that the rudder and the elevators, they have fabric. And this was for two purposes. One, to save aluminum. And number two, the fabric was a much lighter feel when you flew the aircraft. And but mainly it was for saving aluminum. The ailerons in this aircraft are actually made of wood, and then it has a fabric overlay on top of the wood. It is truly the hen's tooth of the aircraft. It has to be balanced absolutely perfectly. If not, the top speed of this aircraft is 410 knots, 450 miles an hour. And if they're not perfectly balanced, they'll go into a flutter and rip off the airplane. So everything has to be perfect.
We have one more.
Yes, I was just curious. Do you guys have a ballpark estimate of the number of pilots that have come through this cockpit?
Wow. Total number, no, but we researched it within the squadrons. And when my dad found X amount of pilots that actually flew this bureau number, you have to then go to their individual logs to see 97,143 listed. So I'm sure there was a lot of different pilots. We were able to locate about 8 or 9 that actually flew this in combat.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Sam.
Folks, a couple more items here. Wait a minute.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if you were flying a Corsair and you met head-on with a P-51, same fuel conditions, same flight conditions, and went for each other's tail, who would win that dogfight?
Better pilot.
Remember, I fly with a P-51, and this is the topic of discussion every time. If you got into a dogfight, who's going to win? Of course, I have horsepower, so I have brute force. The Mustang has agility because it's light, sleek, but not as much horsepower, so you definitely got to get the advantage, and I'll shoot them down every time.
This program is put on by the Warbirds of America, and I want to kind of stress something here. You don't have to be a Warbird owner to be a member of the Warbirds of America. Most of us aren't. Jim is he's on the board of directors, And we would love to have your membership and kind of support us to keep these airplanes flying. And thank you folks for coming. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.